And with that, I will introduce our first speaker, Aaron Minc. Aaron is a nationally recognized leader in the area of online defamation. His firm, Minc Law, which has 8 attorneys, focuses exclusively on helping clients removing damaging content from the internet, combat defamatory online attacks, deal with online extortion and sextortion, and uncover the identities of anonymous internet users. With over a decade of experience, Aaron has successfully litigated more than 100 internet defamation lawsuits in 19 states and 3 countries. He has successfully obtained verdict by jury and judge and has won temporary, preliminary, and permanent injunction and victory on appeal. This past month, Aaron appeared on a BBC documentary and live on TV news channel France 24 to contribute legal analysis on the Johnny Depp and Amber Heard trial. He also recently started a TikTok account in April where he regularly produces short video content on this matter. I will drop his username in the chat, and I can't think of anyone else to kick us off today. Aaron, the floor is yours. Take it away.
Great, thank you so much. And it's a pleasure to be here to give a presentation today to all of you about the Depp v. Heard case. I kind of randomly started a TikTok account back in April and started covering the channel, the trial, and it took off to a small extent. I gained over 18,000 followers, had some videos reach millions of views, and really enjoyed covering the trial, had a lot of fun with it. I'm a little burnt out from it, to be honest. I haven't TikToked in like probably 30 days, but that's why I think I was asked to do this presentation today. So was hoping just to keep it at a high level, get into some details, but only a short time. So let's just jump into things. Let me going on there. All right. So again, just real quick plug. My firm is Minc Law. We call ourselves the nation's #1 internet defamation law firm. Why are we #1? I always get crap about that because quite frankly, we're really the only firm that does what we do as a law firm exclusively focused on this area. So it's easy to call yourself the best when you're the only one. So there's that. But what we focus on primarily in our motto or purpose is that we look to give people, businesses and individuals, peace of mind in a digital world, stopping the harm and pain that's being caused by online defamation. We cover a variety of different areas as our typical service areas of what we help our clients with: extortion, defamation, harassment, revenge porn, content removal. We also do some defamation defense, online investigation services, expert witness services. We consult on online reputation management, and we do provide digital risk protection services as well. Today, I'm going to go over a brief background of the case and its history, why it was filed in Virginia, both of the parties' claims and obstacles that they faced out the gate legally, and some of the evidence that they presented in the kind of essence of the dispute that happened. Then I'm going to get into the eventual verdict and why I think it went the way it did. If you have any questions, put them in the chat or in the Q&A, and Kris and I will get to them after the presentation, after we've both gone. I'll give a small trigger warning. I am going to show a picture or two of alleged abuse. If that's something that you don't want to deal with or will upset you, then don't watch the first 5 minutes. Just turn it off and jump back in if that's not something you want to be exposed to. So Depp v. Heard. So I wasn't like a huge fan of Johnny Depp and didn't really know Amber Heard that much either prior to the trial. Depp is this A-list celebrity who has been in films going back to the 1980s. His biggest hit is Pirates of the Caribbean in that series. However, he's starred in films like 21 Jump Street. He was Edward in Edward Scissorhands. He was Charlie in the remake of Charlie in the Chocolate Factory, and played the Mad Hatter in Alice in Wonderland. Amber Heard is a star too, although not necessarily as big as Johnny. She played a significant role in the movie London Fields, Adderall Diaries, Justice League, Zack Snyder's Justice League, and Aquaman. She also had a lot of roles in TV series and other movies like Magic Mike, Friday Night Lights, or Saturday Night Lights, or whatever. Going back a long way, the couple met in 2009 in the filming of the movie The Rum Diaries. Soon after, they started dating. About 3 years later in 2012, were able to meet up. They wound up getting married 3 years later in February of 2015. And then in 2016, Amber Heard and May filed for divorce. So the marriage was very short-lived, only lasted 15 months. 3 days later, Heard filed for a temporary restraining order alleging that she had been abused by Johnny Depp. This is kind of where things really kick off in terms of what this case is about and why it was so important. So this is a picture of Amber Heard when she went down to the courthouse. It was a media circus. She had her publicist with her and a number of friends, her lawyer. At the time, she was sporting a bruise on her left cheek. You can see right there. In her sworn statements that she filed with the court, she alleged that Johnny Depp had thrown a cell phone at her, striking her in the eye and cheek, that he pulled her hair, hit her repeatedly and grabbed her face, and that he was high and drunk when the incident occurred. She said that this was really just one act in what had been, a lot of different physical and verbally abusive acts throughout their entire relationship, where he'd assaulted her on a number of occasions. There was photo evidence included where basically the TRO was filed on a Friday, and this was a picture from that Friday. This was the picture from that Saturday when the event occurred, allegedly. She was granted a TRO, and this was her breaking down in tears, very upset when she left the courthouse. So all in all, it was incredibly serious allegations. It was not a good look for Johnny Depp. Johnny Depp denied the allegations when they were filed. Evidence that they pointed to at the time was that, to kind of combat it, was that the LA Police Department did show up on the scene that evening on Saturday. The police did not report that any crime had occurred. They found no evidence. Heard told the officers it was a verbal dispute only. The next day and the next 2 days, she was also seen out with friends, out with family. The bruises had disappeared and seemed to be having a good time in love and life. One of the things that was brought to light by Depp's attorney was that it was they argued it was inappropriate that she had sought a TRO at all, given that he was out of the country at the time and wasn't supposed to be returning for months. And his general stance on it was that he was not going to be responding and that it was a denial. So fast forward a few months, in August, the couple was able to reach a divorce settlement of $7 million. Amber released to the press that she was not going to take a dime of the money. She was going to donate the entire thing to charity, half to the ACLU and half to the local children's hospital there in LA. And after some back and forth about NDAs and other things, they did finalize the divorce in January. They agreed to a confidentiality agreement and released a mutual joint statement that neither party had made false accusations. Their relationship was emotional, intense, and that they were moving forward with things, and Amber was donating her her settlements to charity. So all was well until about 2 years later, Amber Heard published an article an op-ed in the Washington Post, which was the focus of the defamation suit that was filed. The headline was that she spoke up against sexual violence and faced our culture's wrath. At the time, she retweeted it, saying that she published the op-ed and simultaneously announced that she was becoming an ambassador for women's rights with the ACLU to advance their agendas of going against violence and discrimination. So notably, that was 3 days before Aquaman came out. So it was taking some advantage of the publicity that she was being afforded by the movie that she was in. So it was clearly timed with that release. At the time, the newspapers saw her article as being tied to her abuse allegations against Johnny Depp. The USA Today came out saying such. And a month later, Depp was then dropped from the making of Pirates of the Caribbean 6, the 6th movie in that series. Depp then, in March of the following year, filed a lawsuit against Amber Heard in Virginia for defamation. And eventually, Amber Heard cross-claimed for defamation and some other acts as well related to the Computer Fraud and Abuse Act. So before we get into the actual allegations and some of the evidence and things like that, one of the preliminary questions that a lot of people always have is, why was this case filed in Virginia? Johnny Depp and Amber Heard aren't from Virginia. They aren't located in Virginia. They don't have houses or residences in Virginia. None of the witnesses in the case were from Virginia. And none of the facts that occurred in the case regarding the alleged abuse, publication, et cetera, had anything to do with Virginia. So it was rather curious that the case was being filed in Virginia. The reason is that under libel law, jurisdiction is proper in the location where the writing is published. And here you have the Washington Post, which has all of its servers. It's owned by Amazon, so clearly AWS. It's located in Virginia, and where they actually publish the print edition is also in Virginia. So that gave them the ability to file the lawsuit in Virginia. It was really just a strategic decision by Depp. You know, just because you can file a lawsuit in Virginia, like, why would you file it there if everything happened in California and Los Angeles? And there are two reasons primarily. California has something called an anti-SLAPP law, which is called a strategic, is a statute or law which basically makes it very difficult to file frivolous defamation lawsuits. And it allows frivolous defamation lawsuits to be dismissed at a very early stage. And for the person who loses, they are then subject to paying the other side's attorney's fees. So they wanted to avoid the California anti-SLAPP law that was in place. Virginia did not have a very strong one at all. And then later, it actually wound up providing a significant advantage at trial, which I'll talk to more later, in that Amber Heard didn't have many witnesses show up in person. And that's probably because it wasn't in LA. Whereas Johnny Depp was able to bring out a lot of people and have them show up, which probably had a little bit of an effect on the verdict, or was a factor. So Depp's legal claim in the article was over 3 statements for defamation. It was over the headline by Amber Heard: "I spoke up against sexual violence and faced our culture's wrath. This has to change." Then 2 years later, I became a public figure representing domestic abuse, and I felt the full force of our culture's wrath for women who speak out. And then 3, I had the rare vantage point of seeing in real time how institutions protect men accused of abuse. These were the 3 statements Johnny Depp was suing over. So 2 of the primary questions and issues that most people usually point out and was of interest for me as a libel attorney, seeing this play out is, how can Johnny Depp sue over these statements? A, his name isn't even mentioned. And 2, her statements, technically speaking, are factually accurate. She was a public figure. She did speak out against sexual violence. She did feel the wrath of speaking out. How is it that this isn't seen as protected speech? And the reason why is because Johnny Depp's defamation claim is not an ordinary defamation claim. It's something called a defamation by implication claim. And the way that defamation by implication claims work is that you have to prove as a plaintiff that the defendant made a statement that, even if true, was designed and intended to give a defamatory message or allegation about another person, that in light of all the surrounding circumstances, everyone who read the statement understood that false implication from what was made, from the writing, basically. And they knew what it was about and who it was about. And if everyone reasonably understands that, even though it doesn't technically mention the person, even though it is technically factually accurate on its face, you can still have a valid claim if the implication from those statements, if it gives a false implication, and those false implications are understood by everyone who reads them to be such. And there are essentially 8 elements that need to be proven as part of this. One is that there's a factual assertion or implication. And here, Depp's claim was that the statement implied that he abused Amber Heard. He committed acts of domestic abuse and sexual violence, as it said in the headline. The second is that allegation is false. And his assertion was that the allegation that he abused or assaulted Amber Heard and that she was a victim was false. That the allegation is defamatory in nature, and defamatory just means that it's embarrassing and shameful, makes you look bad, not just false, but also makes you look bad on top of that and to your reputation. And clearly being labeled an abuser is defamatory. That it was about him, again, and this is from the standpoint that it's reasonably understood to be about that person, even if it doesn't give their name, and that was the case here. That it's published to a third party, clearly it was published in the Washington Post, that it's not privileged or opinion. That was a legal determination made by the court. It would not have gone to trial if it was found to be opinion. That was not a decision for the jury. And it was found to be non-opinion speech. It also had to be made with actual malice. This is a higher standard than normal defamation cases when you have public figures. You have to basically prove that the other person knew that what they were saying was false. They knew that it was a lie, that it was a sham, that they were doing a hoax. Not just that they heard something and maybe they should have looked into it, but they didn't, and a reasonable person would have. It's that they absolutely knew or should have known, given all the circumstances, that what was there was false was false. As I'll explain later, Johnny Depp is saying that Amber Heard wasn't abused. If Amber Heard is saying she's abused and she wasn't abused, clearly she's going to know that that is false if it's false. So that would have been, that element was legally sufficiently pled and met, and that there are actual or presumed damages. in an implied defamation case, you have to show actual economic harm. And here Johnny Depp said he was dropped from Pirates a month later, and that was caused by Amber Heard's Washington Post article. His major obstacles for victory were proving these things, which he did present evidence of at trial. Heard's claims got boiled down to 3 statements made by Johnny Depp's legal representatives. This was the first one, that she uses allegations of alleged violence as both a defense and a sword to inflict harm on Depp, that the attack that happened that led to the TRO was a hoax, and her friends came to this elaborate scheme. And then a third, that we've reached the beginning of the end of the abuse hoax. And those were all made by Johnny Depp's legal representative. Her major obstacles were proving that Johnny Depp should be liable for the statements of his representative, that the representative and or Depp had an actual knowledge when they made those statements, or should have known that they were false. And of course, she would have to prove that they were actually false. So the evidence presented, and you know the verdict, some people wonder, what happened here. So the crux of what eventually the case boiled down to is that Depp said, I never hit Amber Heard, ever, never happened. He admitted to a lot of other things. He said he never crossed the line into actual physical abuse or any sort of sexual violence. On the other hand, Heard was saying, I got abused 14 times. There's really no middle ground there. Really, someone was lying. That was really the crux of the case. You could not have on one hand someone say, I was abused 14 times, and someone say I was abused 0, and have it be only that they were abused, 2 times. It just doesn't really seem rational. Someone was lying about a lot of things, and it came down to credibility at the end of the day. Amber Heard's evidence of abuse that she presented at trial was that she directly testified to 14 different incidences. Her sister testified as to one when she was standing in the middle of a fight between the two, that Depp had reached over and had struck Amber and pulled her hair. There was a makeup artist who did not actually witness the abuse, but confirmed some of Heard's testimony that she had covered up bruises and a split lip. Some of Amber's friends took photos of her swollen lip, pulled hair, etc. You saw at least one of those photos earlier. After an incident had occurred, they did not witness the actual incident happening. And the joint marital therapist, who is Johnny Depp's witness, did say in her testimony that Johnny Depp engaged in violence and that there was mutual abuse. Violence doesn't mean that he necessarily hit Amber Heard. You can be violent in ways where you strike other things, but there was confirmed violence. And Amber Heard presented a lot of tapes and texts with verbal abuse by Depp, and just a lot of evidence of excessive alcohol and drug use. So the way the verdict eventually turned out is that Depp won on all 3 claims. He was awarded $10 million in compensatory damages by the jury, and he was awarded $5 million in punitive damages, which was reduced to $350,000. Heard won her second claim about the elaborate hoax by the friend. She was awarded $2 million in compensatories. And what it came down to, and what the verdict told us, is that the jury did not believe Amber Heard at all. And they punished her. They awarded $5 million in punitive damage. They didn't just say like, oh, you lost. It's no, you lied and we're going to punish you for it. So they definitively thought that she was a liar, and Depp's lawyer was found at fault, and by proxy Depp, for the statements that he had made. And Depp has been widely seen as being completely vindicated in terms of his reputation by the verdict for the most part. When you look at why did Depp win, it comes down to credibility. Heard was shown in the case, and I watched a lot of it, to be a manipulative liar, basically, is what happened. She lied about her claims that she donated the entire proceeds of her settlement to the ACLU, and Children's Hospital has found that she donated a little bit of money, but then Elon Musk donated money on her behalf that she was credited for, and she had every opportunity to make the full donation, didn't, and was taking full credit for it. She repeatedly kept saying that the article wasn't about Johnny Depp, but then at parts of her cross-examination slipped and admitted that it was. There was evidence introduced at trial that she had doctored photos of abuse in terms of putting photos through filters and manipulating them to make injuries appear worse than they were. There was evidence presented that she fabricated property damage. She was called out and denied leaking things during the case to the media, specifically TMZ, during their divorce proceeding. She continued to lie about this during trial. It was shown by TMZ that later, when they came and as witnesses, that yeah, she leaked it. There was this pooping incident with where, and these are things where she could have admitted that she wasn't forthright about these things. And it wouldn't have killed her case. The abuse allegations were in many cases, her stories were very 50-50 calls. There are reasons to believe her, there are reasons to believe Depp. These were things that had, in many cases, nothing to do with the actual alleged abuse incidences. And like the fact that as a joke, apparently, when she was mad at Johnny Depp, she pooped on his bed, and she blamed it on their Yorkie, who's 4 pounds. And when they showed the picture of the poop, it was like no dog could have done that, right? And they brought in others. I'm running up against the clock a little bit, and I want to make sure Kris has enough time. But other factors were that her testimony was seen as very performative. There were a lot of factual issues presented that counteracted a lot of her stories, showed a lot of details were off. She gave Johnny Depp a big knife for his birthday, while she's saying that she's accusing him of abuse and scared for her life. Would you really give an abuser a knife as a birthday present? Her sexual violence claims were very sensationalized. I don't think they were believable personally, and I don't think the jury believed them. And when it came down to it, as opposed to Amber Heard's testimony when she was on the stand, where she wasn't taking accountability for any of her flaws, the fact of her abuse that she was engaged in with Depp, which there was a lot of evidence that it was going both ways. She took accountability for none of it, whereas Depp took accountability for everything. That he was, a drug abuser, that he engaged in verbal abuse, that, he had a lot of flaws, but just didn't do that, didn't hit her physically was his line. And the fact that she was a mutual abuser was not a good thing, obviously. Other factors were that she had a prior incident introduced at trial. There were a lot of other things that went into it. And Johnny Depp's celebrity probably took some part in that. He did have the vast support of a lot of the public. His fans were there in the courtroom. People showed up for him when the trial came. Amber Heard did not have that type of showing. I'm sure it played a factor in the trial. So that was the gist of it. So Kris, I'll hand it over to you now.
Thank you, Aaron. Yeah, I'm just going to introduce Kris really quickly here. Great job on your portion though, Aaron. Thank you. Kris Ruby is a nationally recognized speaker in social media and crisis management. Her firm, Ruby Media Group, helps clients develop executive thought leadership marketing campaigns utilizing digital PR and SEO strategies. She is a leading crisis communications expert and the go-to expert in the US on cancel culture. She is the author of The State of Social Media Harassment and Ruby Chronicles an insider look at bullying, harassment, and online abuse, and a term she penned as digital domestic violence. She's been a speaker at several national conventions and events on social media, law firm branding, including the American Bar Association and the Northern Westchester Bar Association. She's also been called upon to provide commentary on the Amber Heard case as well. So thank you so much, Kris, if you want to just bring us home. Thank you.
Thank you so much for having me. And thank you, Erin. That was great. We all learned a lot from your presentation. I'm just going to put this in the full screen view and then we'll get started. So hi, everyone. I'm Kris Ruby. I am going to be talking about a few different things. One, today will be my story with online harassment and social media abuse and some tips for handling that as a victim of it. And two will be the role that social media has played in this case of Depp versus Heard, and three will be crisis communications and PR strategies. This is my bio slide, but since that was just read, we'll skip past it. Just a little bit more about me. To start with, my company is Ruby Media Group, and we specialize in PR, crisis communications, risk mitigation, and online reputation management. So when someone is canceled, they come to us to try and help them, or if they're dealing with online harassment or any of these issues. So as I said earlier, we're going to talk about the role of this being a social media trial, the court of public opinion, and how that's influenced through the rehabilitation of an image, through digital public relations, as well as digital domestic violence and escalation. So this really was, Depp versus Heard was the social media trial. And so what is the role of social media in this trial? Were creators incentivized to create pro-Depp content for views and clicks? When we actually look at the numbers, I mean, there's a stark difference here. So on TikTok, hashtag justice for Johnny Depp, you had 21 billion views. For hashtag justice for Amber Heard, you had 108.4 million views. There's no comparison into the two. And what's really problematic about this is that you have people who started covering this who really had no background at all in the legality of the case, or even some of the facts here, who weren't at all licensed to practice law in any way. But what happened is they started to see that if they covered this trial on social media, in particular TikTok, it incentivized them to get more views, likes, clicks, traffic, and build their following. And so on the one hand, that's good for them, but what does that really mean for society? Is that good for society as a whole if you have people covering things for clicks who aren't really the best ones to be covering something because it's out of their scope of practice? The media coverage, I mean, we've sort of seen it run the gamut, but this TikTok's Amber Heard hate machine, this is a really interesting article by Amanda Hess in which she talks about the immediacy of the live stream and its commentary. It gives viewers the illusion they can somehow influence the outcome. Now, we know that this is not necessarily the case, but people had a strong vested interest in believing that their commentary could influence the outcome of the case. And so the live streaming of this trial also brought a lot of controversy with it. It turned into somewhat of a virtual sport, not only on TikTok, but on YouTube as well, and even on Instagram Live too. And so one of the things that I said in the Huffington Post around the same time is that you don't always have to share a hot take on social media. These issues are nuanced, and I think it's important, and I think Erin also sort of mentioned this at the top, which is to say that some people came out of the woodwork suddenly having this vested interest in Amber versus Heard, and which side are they on? And I think Erin said very much the opposite, that he wasn't on one side either way and was just reviewing the facts. And I fundamentally agree with that philosophy here in terms of coverage as the right way to be reviewing this when you're using any social media platform. I think the challenge that we have is that in the creator economy right now, creators are incentivized to have a hot take because that hot take gets them a larger audience. And often that hot take can be at the expense of other people. In this case, it could be a domestic violence victim. And people are commenting on something that really, unless they know the evidence, unless they've looked at that evidence, or unless they've even talked to the victim, they truly don't actually know what's going on. And that creates a larger problem of misinformation and fake news. And the other issue is that, of course, there were these harmless channels, although they're not really harmless, dedicated to legal commentary, except they're not legal experts giving legal commentary. And that, I think, is, of course, unethical and just wrong. And here you can see, right, again, these are the stats that I talked about earlier. A recent report just came out last week from Bot Sentinel, which was fascinating, right? And they're saying that this was the anti-Amber Heard Twitter campaign was one of the worst cases of cyberbullying that they have seen in terms of the rampant abuse and widespread targeted harassment. They refer to abusive trolls, verbal abuse, and platform manipulation. And then here are just some of the statistics from that. And it's really bad. I will say also that there's a trigger warning in some of the content here and maybe beyond this part of this. But what's happening here is that they're not only continuing to attack Amber Heard, but they're continuing to attack anyone that was pro-Heard. And this has actually gotten substantially worse even after the trial. So what can we take away from this? One, how social media could influence future high-profile cases. This is still yet to be determined, but I think if this is any indication of it, it can influence it in a very large way. We've seen Amber Heard's lawyer publicly stating on air that social media attacks may have influenced the jury in this trial. Johnny Depp's attorney said that social media absolutely did not impact the trial. Who's right? It's yet to be determined. Amber Heard also claimed that it influenced the trial. I'm of the belief that social media absolutely can influence public opinion, especially in a PR campaign, in any sort of crisis, and in a trial. The impact of this cannot be understated, not only for this case, but for future case and for future victims who are going to file claims. This is certainly going to set a large precedent on who comes forward as a victim here, because many victims now may be afraid that the same thing could happen to them if they write something, even if someone is not named, that they could be implicated in that article. The account amplification of positive stories and pro-Depp content is something that also has to be further studied and researched. Users can shape public opinion with social media smear campaigns. And the second half of this is going to be about how do users do that? And what does this look like, not only for Amber Heard, but for a public figure or a regular citizen who is not a public figure? Because I think both are valid. And I think often, sometimes we only hear the stories of the Amber Heard who, where this is a highly publicized trial, but that's not always everyone else's experience. So how can you measure the impact of social media, their reaction on the jury during the break? That has yet to be determined, and that needs to be researched. So what are abusive social media tactics? And here we're getting back to the second half of my presentation. Harassment on social media can include the following: artificial amplification of abusive content through coordinated smear campaigns, platform manipulation. The abuse is always cross-platform, right? So it could go from Quora to Twitter, to TikTok, to YouTube, to LinkedIn, to Facebook, to all of these different places, to Reddit. Doxing and threats, an obsessive focus on the target to drive clicks or traffic. Usually there is an ill intent or motivation behind this, which is that they are either trying to bait that person into replying to the allegations that are being said, because that person will have often a larger audience or following, and they want to have some sort of public recognition or SEO traffic from it. Hashtag spamming, tormenting the person by proxy. So contacting business associates, contacts by studying social media connections, which is why it's becoming increasingly important to hide all of your social media connections to make this harder for people to do. Next would be discrediting the victim's professional credentials, to say, for example, they're not really who they say they are. This person is a liar. This person shouldn't be believed. This person is a fraud. Any of those sort of, outrageous, exaggerated type language, which falls under usually defamation. All of that can be used in this case. Attacking the person's physical appearance, also posting private information. So a lot of this falls under invasion of privacy content, where the person may know something that's privileged information, and then they violate that confidentiality and post it online. The targeted harassment, again, is on public forums, websites, and numerous social media sites, regardless of whether or not the person's name is used. And I tend to agree with this statement by Amber Heard, where she said, even somebody who's sure I'm deserving of this hate and vitriol, even if you think I'm lying, You still couldn't tell me, look me in the eye and tell me that you think on social media there's been a fair representation. You cannot tell me that you think it has been fair. Although actually, I'm not going to say if I agree with this one or not. I think based on the statistics that we looked at earlier, I think what we can see is there was some sort of PR force that was a greater play on the pro Depp content than the pro Heard content. And until someone actually, looks on the back end of how, if the algorithms did favor that content, that's the only way one can truly determine that. But that's what I'd say on that. In terms of the court of public opinion, as we know, doubt can cost hundreds of thousands of dollars in lost revenue. And defamation at its core is a series of manufactured stories that result in a continued fight or flight crisis mode in the victim. So what is the role of public relations in high profile cases? Amber Heard fired her PR team mid-trial. She wasn't happy with how her side was represented. Of course, as a PR professional, that's a huge mistake that diminishes and sort of dilutes the public's trust in that person in the middle of a trial. And I would never actually recommend doing that. So can a change in PR affect the outcome of a trial? That's to be determined, but it certainly, again, can influence the shaping of public opinion. And that's what's really important after the trial. So PR is less about impacting the outcome of the trial, more about as I just said, more about impacting public opinion for life after the trial. And we're seeing that Amber Heard is still continuing to tell her story right now and doing a lot of interviews. So if you're really curious to see how all of that plays out, if there's going to be any further settlement or anything else that happens in an effort to try and get her to stop talking. Is it common in celebrity circles to replace PR consultants during an ongoing crisis? No, it's actually not common or best practice for any person or organization to switch pros in the middle of a crisis. So you can add to the team, you can redirect the team, but firing the team 100% sends a message that everything's in chaos. As Warren Buffett said, it takes 20 years to build a reputation and 5 minutes to ruin it. And I think the challenge was that with that statement is that internet trolls right now are really incentivized, as we saw earlier, to go after people with sort of no regard as to what it means to build a reputation or how quickly they can destroy someone's reputation, typically just for the fun of it, because it's fun for them to torture someone. What I've noticed or witnessed in other cases is that it's not even so much about any sort of monetary or financial gain from it. It's about psychological torture of a victim to do it because they can do it and because someone is on the other end of it reading it, and that is fun for the person that is doing that to the victim. So public image matters before a trial. If people know, like, and trust you, it can go a long way in public high profile cases. If they don't know, like, or trust you, it can also really hurt you in cases of defamation, libel, or slander when it comes to social media. So some people will say that PR is only necessary for a crisis. This is false. PR is 100% necessary before a crisis to protect your reputation. So that, similar to insurance, right? When something happens, you are protected and your brand is protected and your reputation is protected. That serves as a buffer where people will say, wait a second, this person's coming out of the woodwork saying these crazy things, but I've known this person and worked with him for 20 years. I don't think these allegations are correct. And so positive PR and a strong reputation is critical for fending off any future business threat. I think that's certainly a key takeaway from this trial. So now let's get into the national debate on domestic violence. I've coined this term digital DV. What does that mean? Digital domestic violence is when there is some sort of domestic violence that takes place through electronic communication over the internet, often on numerous social media platforms, public forums, or a website. It's usually with victims who have never even met in person, but again, have connected through social media platforms. I think it's really important that we recognize that these people are victims as well. I don't think the law has really kept up with the times of what that experience is like for the person who is going through that. And I think that's one of the things that really needs to be tackled and taken on. And so how can law enforcement work with legal professionals to discern between civil and criminal charges? Stalking and harassment often goes hand in hand with defamation. And unfortunately, one of the biggest challenges with law enforcement is that when a victim comes and says that they are on the receiving end of this, law enforcement will often say that this is civil because they're not looking at the overall course of conduct. that takes place, which is necessary, of course, within a stalking case. And each state has different laws around harassment and stalking as well, some stronger than others. But sometimes I think so many of these cases are put off into civil when in reality, they really overlap with criminal charges for stalking and harassment. And I think most of the time that's overlooked. I also think the people that are found guilty of these charges, typically, according to research, many of them plead them down, which makes it very hard to determine someone's background when you are dealing with this as a victim, if that record is hidden and you can't see those charges, or if they pled it down and you only see what they pled it down to. So how can lawyers work with digital DV victims who are being defamed online, but don't have Hollywood budgets to sue? This is a real concern. I would say it's probably the biggest concern facing many millennials today. They're all looking for legal help. I mean, I can't, there isn't a day that goes by that I don't get a text from someone, or even last night got a text from someone else that's dealing with this. There are new victims every single day that is dealing with this. There are, from my experience, what the victims are going through, many of them don't have the budgets that are required to actually successfully really navigate this in the legal system. So there's a big opportunity for someone to bridge that gap, to take on and own that part of the market, to help people that are typically being turned away by law enforcement and turned away by legal professionals if they can't meet a certain threshold for that retainer that they want to take this on. And so it's important to know that social media amplifies harassment of victims. Who's guilty when it comes to this? And when it comes to social media, people are guilty until proven innocent. That's, of course, a major problem. And most digital DV victims suffer in silence while their abusers are pretty loud online and continue the defamation. And Amber Heard stated the harassment and humiliation, the campaign against me on social media every single day. I had to relive the trauma. Now, let's just take this down again to a regular person. Someone continues to write about them every day, regardless of whether or not their name is being used, they too are still reliving the trauma that is associated with that. Harassment is harassment, regardless of whether or not that person's name is used. And that's something Aaron can talk about in the Q&A, because I do have questions for him around that. But I think that too often people take great liberties with what they write on social media, thinking that it won't fall under harassment. And I think based on this case, we've seen that that's just not, the case. So what are some of the strengths? A multidisciplinary approach is going to be required to tackle this issue with law enforcement, legal, PR, victim services, trauma, and support. If you are an attorney that is dealing with one of these victims, try and create some sort of triage or professional referral relationships with someone who can help with outpatient trauma or counseling. Because if you don't have that set up, that trauma is going to go onto you as the attorney on that case. So it's important that the client that you're working with is getting help from someone else while they are working with you under your representation. If not, you will feel like your boundaries are being violated, but in reality, this victim is living in fight or flight, and their brain is on fire, and they need help sort of calming all of that down. It's not necessarily your role to do that, but certainly empathy will help in getting them the right help that they need. Law enforcement will push off these cases until a threat of violence escalates, often resulting in death. This is, of course, really unfortunate because these cases are not taken seriously. And then the opportunities here are lawyers who are on the front lines of domestic abuse. Defamation goes hand in hand with stalking and harassment. So don't ignore the warning signs. Even if you can't take on the case of someone, don't ignore the warning signs. And in terms of threats, digital attacks, often to victims of it, they come on holidays, nights, or weekends. Now, I understand that you may not be available. You may be with your family doing something else. The times that I've actually reached out to a lawyer are like a Saturday morning, a Saturday night at midnight, like Sunday night, like very random times where it's frantic, right? Because that's when the attacks come. They typically come when they believe that someone else is not going to be available to help them or provide support. And so that's something that's important to know. In terms of emergency signs to look out for, one is obviously your reputation. It is on fire across every platform. And so this is why working with a crisis PR firm, as well as an SEO firm who can help with this online reputation brand management, is critical. Suicidal ideation is also really important, and how you handle that is going to be important. If your client reports to you that they feel this way, it's important to properly report it without burning the relationship with them and their confidentiality as well. The smear campaign timeline And this is the timeline, I would say, of deliverables of destruction, right? Phase 1, the smear campaign against the victim begins. Phase 2, the escalation goes to clients, former clients, with the goal of total career destruction, harassment, stalking, and abuse. Phase 3, by the time any defamation suit is filed, years of online abuse may have already ensued. It's really important for whoever is working with that victim to understand that by the time they're coming to you, they have probably spoken to so many people in law enforcement or different attorneys before you, where they feel like they have been misunderstood, blown off, brushed off, and that no one understands what they're going through. So that could result in, for example, you receiving hundreds of pages of documents, which can be overwhelming for you to look through. But it's important that that onboarding process is handled a little differently than it would be with a normal client. And so the course of conduct, again, includes stalking, harassment, libel, slander, defamation, tortious interference. Indirect contact is the biggest one here, and digital surveillance. A lot of the times, most of this is indirect contact and not actually direct contact. That's also one of the issues, I think, with the way that the law is written around this, because it doesn't necessarily really help victims in regards to that. So screenshotting evidence is really important. I will say blockchain technology is extremely important in litigation for this right now. Blockchain is being used as a weapon of domestic violence, where you're going to see a surge in new cases in litigation where, for example, revenge porn or non-consensual images being put to the blockchain or created and minted as an NFT, or text messages, anything that was private that they want to use to abuse, humiliate, shame, or further harass someone will put on blockchain to make sure that it can never really be taken off chain. Of course, this is extremely important, not only in these cases, but also in the cases of child pornography as well. And so this is an area to really watch, because it's not as simple as with Google, for example, getting a DMCA takedown notice. That there are no laws that really govern blockchain right now. It's the wild, wild west. Anyone who's tried to deal with them, whether it's a domain or a trademark takedown, it's nearly impossible to make any headway with that. So I think keeping an eye on that's going to be really important. Stalking is a repeated pattern of a course of conduct. And so continuing to defame someone online repeatedly is a form of stalking. This is where there is a disconnect with the law and the victim experience for that, and what law enforcement does with this. And defamation and libel, of course, is a form of harassment when it's done for no other purpose than to harm a victim. So I know I only have, I'm looking right now, 6 minutes. I'll try and race through the rest of this, but here are some signs if someone is a victim of harassment. One, they will retreat. So lack of participation in professional activities due to the fear that their associates will be targeted, and they want to sort of stop the bleeding and make sure that it doesn't go to anyone else in their network. Two, they're forced to go private. They're afraid to post statements on public forums due to fear of being monitored or watched. And then three, the reputation damage destroys their life. It destroys search engine results, and it erodes their victim and prospects' trust and confidence in them. One thing to notice is that the people, the aggressor is usually out there saying, I'm the victim of stalking and harassment, whereas the victim will stay silent. The victim is usually not saying anything at all. They're hearing from their lawyer, don't say anything, don't share your story. I think the Amber Heard case here is certainly, again, probably going to push more people to stay silent as a result of what just happened in that case, because they will be afraid of lawsuits if they do speak regarding defamation. And then in terms of digital escalation, again, cross-platform abuse, withdrawal, their colleagues are targeted, and then the abuser claims to be the victim. And so the 4 Ds of digital abuse: diminish, discredit, defame, and destroy. And the signs of harassment: emotionally, you're going to start to see signs of behavioral dysregulation as a result of the trauma. If you are working with a client who is experiencing this as a victim of harassment or abuse or defamation, these are all signs that they will exhibit. And I'm sure I'd love to hear Aaron's take on this if he agrees or disagrees with this, but you have to, I think, certainly be trauma informed or somewhat trauma trained to know how to deal with that and to not make it worse. Trouble focusing in performing at work due to trauma and heightened anxiety, and then they stop posting on social media. So the cycle is that the bully harasses the victim, the harassment is reported to the social media platform, and then the platforms become disengaged, and then they don't intervene. And unfortunately, that actually empowers the bully to then further escalate and do more. And that starts the cycle all over again. And so the police say things like, just block them, or change your email address, or get off social media. It's not really harassment if they haven't threatened physical violence. These are, of course, terrible things to say to a victim. And it's really important to sort of put it out there that anyone who's dealing with this, if you tell someone to go to the police and file a report and this is what they're told, it becomes a very challenging situation to hear that. And unfortunately, the courts enable this cross harassment. So if you file for an injunction against harassment, they're not really, one, they're not clearly outlining the social media stipulations for these protection orders, which I'd like to talk about too. But two, they make it very easy for someone to file a retaliatory injunction against the original victim that filed for it. And the result of that is going to be really a decline in people ever filing for that protection in the first place, if that's what happens. In terms of colleagues, the colleagues will block the victim if they're targeted by association. They blame the victim. So across in every quadrant here, the victim is actually blamed for something that's being done to them, because society doesn't really understand, and because the victim's not publicly stating out loud what's going on and stays silent while the other person gets louder and louder. And so if you become entangled in a digital smear campaign, support the victim, don't blame the victim. Forward the evidence to the victim. If you receive defamatory messages about the victim, forward it to them, and then report the abuse. Filing a report with law enforcement and IC3 with the FBI is certainly very helpful, and giving a copy of that report to the victim will go a long way. And so ask yourself, where do you fit into this cycle? Are you a bully, a victim, a supporter, or a defender? It is your fault if you discredit, invalidate, deny, or refuse to listen to a victim because they can't afford a retainer. If you can't help a victim, refer them to a colleague who can. I think there needs to be more of a referral network for people who are willing to take on these cases. There is a stark challenge right now between the rising cases of social media harassment and defamation and the number of lawyers that are specialized in this area and that can take on these cases for people that don't necessarily have large retainers to do it, to protect their reputation. And so if you say, I can't help you if the person defaming you doesn't have a budget, the person defaming you has a history of filing bar complaints, the person defaming you will defame my firm, I don't want to deal with it. The person defaming you will drag this out, I don't have time. So really lead with empathy, right? We talk so much about cultural change in this country. And so these are just some things. If you say these things to someone, understand that this person is already feeling misunderstood by everyone they're talking to. Try and have empathy. If you're on the receiving end of the person, you are often the front line and they're looking to you for guidance or help. Turn your mess into your message. It's not your fault, is what I like to say to people. I've written 2 different really helpful resources. One is called The State of Social Media Harassment. The other is called Social Media and Mental Health Challenges on TikTok, particularly amongst teenagers. You can get both of them on my website. And if I can give any help to you or to any other victims, feel free to reach out to me. And I guess, I don't know if we're out of time, but that's it on my end. Thank you.
Great job. Do you guys want to answer the incoming questions now? I think the first one goes to you, Kris. How often do cases of digital DV result in physical violence?
So that's a really good question. From my experience, I think a lot of times, I can't speak for everyone. I can say, I think they don't. I think that's one of the challenges as to why these don't go further, because without physical violence, the police have their hands tied, right? And so the case is just not going to go really far, especially when you're dealing with things like defund the police and increasing, rates of homicide. The police are going to look at this, someone's being mean to this person online versus I have 10 homicide cases. Like, which one am I going to focus on? It's certainly not the one where someone is saying mean things about someone online. 9 out of 10 times, they will always say, work with a defamation attorney, it's civil. Without actual physical violence, they're not going to push it forward. That's what I would say to that.
Can protection orders set forth stipulations regarding media postings without conflicting with First Amendment / prior restraint or restraint concerns?
That's a question for Aaron.
Sure, and I can respond to that first one too, where I don't know how often they become physical. The digital ones turn physical in real life. But in my practice, what we see sometimes is more self-inflicted harm. You have victims of sextortion or online harassment call, and they're suicidal. They're depressed, they're going through a lot of issues, and it causes major mental health crises, and people can engage in self-harm from that type of thing, which obviously is no good and just as bad as someone else harming them directly. As it relates to the TRO and the prior restraint issue, so for people who aren't free speech nerds, there's something called prior restraint, where if you want to get an injunction in court against someone to stop saying defamatory things or things that are illegal or bad, legally, you're usually not allowed to do that because that's called a prior restraint on speech. Usually under the law, what's supposed to happen is you're supposed to go through an entire trial, and then you can get something called a permanent injunction, which would stop the continued publication of something that's false or harassing or illegal in terms of under civil or criminal law. So whether you can get that with a TRO in terms of like a domestic restraining order, I've seen it done before. Sometimes judges don't always know that the prior restraint issue is there. Other times they deem it as an exception in terms of being a criminal form of harassment or other type of illegal conduct that would warrant something like that. But it can be tricky if you're going in there trying to attack someone's speech online and then running up against the First Amendment hurdle at the end of the day.
Awesome, thank you. I mean, I know we have a couple of questions you wanted to ask each other to kind of dig in a little bit more. If anyone wants to stay on, I definitely will issue an additional quarter hour of CLE credit. Aaron, Kris, do you have any other questions you wanted to ask each other to finish us off?
Sure. Yeah, I have some time. Aaron, do you have a few minutes?
Yeah, absolutely.
So Aaron, I know one of the things that we talked about, you mentioned the temporary restraining order in Amber Heard's case. So let's sort of bring this up to speed now with social media and the role that social media can play with an injunction against harassment or any sort of protective order. Can someone violate an order of protection based on social media activity, whether that's a Facebook like, whether it's continuing to write about someone? Like, what do people need to understand about that?
Sure. So I'm not a family law attorney, so I don't know all the ins and outs. I'm not the most qualified person to talk about those types of restraining orders, but I will, to the extent that I have some knowledge on it. So my understanding is that usually if you're going in for a type of DV order of protection situation, what you're getting essentially is a no contact order. I have a legitimate fear of this person. They are a threat to me. It also varies significantly by state, what the rule of law is, what can constitute a valid reason to get one, what the scope of the protection that you're going to get. And then when you go in, the judge might, can issue these things with a variety of different remedies and stipulations tied to them. But it could potentially violate a restraining order. If you're ordered by a court not to have contact with someone, to stop harassing them, that means no contact. So if you were to message them through social media or send them emails or that directly, notify them, contact them, that could be construed as a violation of a DV order or a order of protection in some situations. In other situations, it wouldn't be if it was more of something that was kind of automated, for example.
But what if we take what Amber Heard did, right? Like, would that be considered a violation? If there's an order of protection, she then writes about someone, she's not naming who the person is writing about someone without naming them a violation of these orders of protection?
Generally speaking, I would say no, it isn't, because you're not contacting that person. You're allowed, this is where the kind of I'm looking for the right word here, but the friction between the First Amendment and DV laws comes into play, is that, you know, you can't shut down someone's right to speak and speak their mind and their constitutional protections under the Constitution to be able to say things and say that that is in fact contacting another person just because you publish it publicly. So I think that would be different.
So then it really falls under defamation then, so it wouldn't be a violation of that. It again goes back to what you talked about earlier.
Sure. And someone's posting in the chat, thank you, Alexandria, that apparently there has been some case law dealing with this, that it can be in some instances a violation of a or a form of stalking, which I wouldn't necessarily disagree with that either. In relation to a no contact order, though, simply just saying like, I think someone's terrible. That's my opinion. That would be I think that would be a very close call. If they're engaged in criminal stalking, though, that's a different issue, right? That could be an exception. That's not protected speech then.
I want to, Aaron, you asked me a question earlier that I wanted to address about
Sure.
False allegations. What was the question?
You know,
False abusement.
Oh, sure. I guess I do have a question. If you were Amber Heard's PR team, what would you have done in her situation where she's just facing an insurmountable social media, you know, wave against her of public, you know, sentiment and posts and harassment? You know, what can you do from a PR standpoint in that type of situation where like an entire social media platform kind of turns against you?
Yeah, that's a great question. And I think she certainly sort of lost the social media war and public opinion because she just didn't put the resources behind digital in the same way that his team did. So one, I would have reallocated resources and efforts and the tactics we were deploying in that campaign to do more with social media platforms and to also work more with DV resources and those sort of groups to try and get that story out. What's interesting to me is that there's sort of been this backlash about this afterwards, not before and not during, but the tide is turning after. And so I think that in many regards is too late. That should have been done earlier on. So I think that's unfortunate. I think having those partnerships and having those people and firms as allies would have been more helpful. I also think there's a whole mental health component here. It came out that there were allegations of Amber Heard having borderline personality disorder. I think facing that head on and talking about that and sort of replying to that and using that as an opportunity to help people, right? To help other people who may be diagnosed with that. Like there are, if you look on, for example, TikTok, hashtag BPD and borderline personality disorder, those are some of the largest growing mental health hashtags right now. So there was an opportunity if she tapped into that to say, hey, wait a second, I can help some other people. But I don't feel like that happened. It may happen now after the fact, but I don't think it was happening while it was going on. And so my approach certainly would have been lean into what's happening and what's being said about you and own it rather than trying to make it not happen and go away.
Mm-hmm. That's great.
Well, thank you both for taking the time to hold this discussion and kind of outline this spectacle of a case. To everyone who stuck with us for these last 10 minutes, thank you very much. I will get the CLE survey out to you right away after we conclude. Thank you again, Aaron and Kris. And yeah, everyone have a great day. And thank you again for tuning in.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Everyone.
Bye, everyone.
Thanks.